Hey everybody, Garry Adelman, American Battlefield Trust here at Gettysburg 160. I think you already know that, and we are standing in the angle, and I'm with one of my oldest pals, man, Wayne Motts, President and CEO of the Gettysburg Foundation. And Wayne and Jim Hessler wrote a whole book about this, but we're just going to spend a few minutes setting this up. Wayne, where are we standing? Why do we care?
Garry, I want to thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you and the visitors and viewers here for the 160th Gettysburg. So we're inside the angle here. Pickett's charge, July 3rd, 1863, and right behind me where Kris is filming the 76th Pennsylvania.
72nd.
70. You think maybe he doesn't want to have me here, everybody.
We'll edit this out.
72nd PA, right, of the Philadelphia Brigade. And of course, this is the line for July 3rd, the Union defense. And Kris is showing right across the Emmitsburg Road, looking over toward where Lee is for the Virginia Memorial for Pickett's charge on July 3rd, 1863. So this is the view that the Confederates will have when they come across this field, Garry, for July 3rd. And we're standing where the Union defense is. So we all know that on July 3rd, about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you've got this big artillery barrage, and it starts from where Kris is filming, right over here to the Union line, and the Union troops hunkered right down here below the stone wall. We're up, where 2 guns of Alonzo Cushing's 4th U.S. Artillery going to be posted here. And then at 3 o'clock, after this massive 2-hour cannonade, which does a lot of hearing damage, and there's a lot of smoke, but there's not, the physical damage here. The Union Army's able to recover, bring up reserves for that. And then right across here, the Confederate troops will be marching across about 3 o'clock until 4 o'clock on July 3rd, 1863. And then right behind where Kris is filming, right in front of us, you've got the Confederates coming over this wall. Lewis Armstead, who will follow me, give him the cold steel with that hat on his sword, coming right across here into the center of this line for July 3rd, breaking this line. And then the Union troops, of course, rushing up the copse of trees that's located over here behind us to try to seal off this hole for the 3rd day.
Yeah, and and let me tell you, we've shot a video or 2 here before. Check out our Medal of Honor video about those shot around here. Check out our Pickett's charge and angle videos from Gettysburg 155, 156, 157, 158, 159. And those are on Facebook and YouTube. You may have to check out both. Go to our website and click videos on the map, or just Google videos on the map, American Battlefield Trust. You'll see where we shot all of our previous videos and where you can find them and link right to them. So we're not going to go into a lot of detail here. We want to focus on this copse of trees, and see how we can understand a little bit better about that. But this angle thing was a weak point in the line. You had infantry and a little bit of artillery, and then you had more infantry, Pennsylvanians along this line. But the Union has, tens of thousands of reinforcements behind there if they need it, but the Southerners are advancing with this overwhelming force, and that's how they break in. And there are some great stories about them pouring over. I've given hundreds, if not thousands, of tours right here, and I am looking at right where it happened. It still gives me a little bit of chills.
One of my favorite stories up here, Garry, is one of the furthest flags to get across here, the 53rd Virginia Infantry Regiment. That flag follows basically the pathway where Garry and I are walking, and it's had multiple color bearers here. And the last color bearer, he will Hutchings Carter, he's a young lieutenant in the 53rd of Virginia. He's going to pick up that flag, run right up here past where we're standing, right in the heart of the Union line, and he's surrounded by Union troops. He throws up his arms and basically surrenders here. And according to the account, he had 17 bullet holes in his clothes and not a mark on his body. The bullets went all the way through his clothing, and he surrenders and gets hauled off the POW camp, dies after the war. But that flag is held, and today it's in the American Civil War Museum, which used to be the old Museum of the Confederacy. It still exists, as do many of the flags here for the for the Confederate Army for Pickett's charge. And the Union flags are generally in their respective states, like Pennsylvania. These Pennsylvania flags that were here.
You almost have like all the Civil War experiences crammed into this one ridge, Cemetery Ridge. And I'm reminded when you said that he came through with all these holes in his clothing before the big bombardment. Some of Cushing's limbers are going to explode. 2 in 1 shot, I think, and they explode in every direction, and it doesn't kill anybody, and it doesn't even kill a horse, but the horse is bolted on through the Union line, and that was the most dangerous moment for some of these Pennsylvanians along the wall here. I'm also reminded, thinking of the wall, I think I read it in your book actually, of a Confederate who's behind the wall, and he's watching, and he sees General Garnett staring at the Union, assembling in the distance with reinforcements, as if it would not deter him at all. And they were ready to go on, but soon Garnett goes down. They are eventually, going to be led over the wall by Armistead and only to be pushed back. I mean, what, Robert E. Lee's greatest defeat of all time?
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at what happened here on July 3rd, these troops, tremendous effort by the Union Army and the Union defense here, and then the Confederate Army breaking through here. But the Confederates pay a tremendous price, a price that they can't repay and can't put back, as far as not only the bodies, but the leadership here. The leadership of Pickett's division and the others that are here just decimated, Gary. And that's going to affect all the rest of the time throughout the war, the experienced leadership that Lee will have. He just doesn't have it, and it's going to be a problem.
Maybe another reason why people use this as this is a high water mark. It's not only far north. I've never really bought into this being the turning point of the Civil War or more important than Vicksburg, but you do have this, this high water mark for Lee. Is this the moment where he simply doesn't have the officers, the experience? I mean, you can make that argument for 1862 and 64 as well, though.
Right, and of course the troops, when they left here, they don't see it the same way we do. We know it was a turning point of the war, I think, but I don't think the troops see it quite the certain way that we do. Certainly the loss of Vicksburg, tremendous. Doesn't make Gettysburg less important, it's just a different view of it, I think. And the loss of the Confederate soldiers here, especially in the leadership roles, that's going to haunt Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia for the rest of the war, as far as getting those experienced people. And we also should say the Union Army suffered, I mean, you've probably got 1,500 Union casualties that are across this defensive line too as well. Thousands of Union troops that are going to go down in the middle of this as well. But the loss of that leadership, killed or wounded, different, I think, on the Confederate side and here on the Union side.
Hard to argue with that. Let's walk and talk a little bit. That's Kris White behind the camera. You're with the American Battlefield Trust, and it is Gettysburg 160, and here we are at the angle where there's not a whole lot of people around us. We start early sometimes here at the American Battlefield Trust. Make sure you click that subscribe button, hit that ringing bell, follow us, and share this stuff with your friends, please. It only makes sense for us to do this if as many people are seeing it as possible, and we appreciate your support. Now, one of the things I really enjoyed about your and Jim's book is the way you characterize this angle as not this nicely manicured place. I've never seen it otherwise. It's only looked like this, but you talked about bramble and bushes and trees, and the copse of trees were not just a perfect circle. It was kind of scattered trees and whatnot.
Yeah, and Gary, one of the things that you don't see today, which you clearly see on the maps and on drawings, is a scrub group of trees right where these rocks are. And you don't have any of that that's now today. So a lot of this stuff that's around, it looks a lot neater than it would have been back in 1863. And the later photos, you can see
some of this scrub in the late 1880s. You can even see some of that. That's the clump of trees on the left there, I believe, and you're seeing some of early Hancock Avenue here and some of that scrub. While I have this, let me see what else I have here. Here's after it's going to get a little bit more manicured, and you can suddenly see, there's no more trees left. And
that's really, after the High Water Mark Memorial.
Yeah, you can see the fence right there. Now, I'm going to go backward a little bit to note that the clump of trees, was much more scrubby in the years after the battle. Here's the clump of trees on the right of this photo. That's Winfield Scott Hancock standing tall off right center. And there is the park's first historian, John Badger Batchelder, who would do so much to popularize this area. I'm going to go to the next photo here and zoom in on this area right here where my thumb is here. Because even when you look off to the right there, they're kind of standing on Hancock Avenue. There was some sort of like a stone, piles of stone or stone walls, and that really comports with what Wayne and Jim have said in their book, talking about the rugged nature of this. And the men of the 69th Pennsylvania on the wall in front of us actually cleared trees from the stone wall, and they started putting brush behind them to the point where it formed an almost impenetrable barrier. No wonder they stuck at the wall. They couldn't go anywhere.
So that you've got Union defense all on top of where that rock wall is. What's interesting about that image of the copse of trees with those rocks, it really makes you wonder whether or not they didn't try to, they being some of the historians or something, trying to put those rocks up to prevent people from going in there, Gary, because we know that John Batchelder tried in 1885, he tried in 1886 to have a fence put around. He eventually got it passed in 1887, and then a few years later he gets the monument. But they want to put a fence around that because the veterans are taking wood off those trees. and making things out of them. So
Yeah.
it makes you wonder whether or not somebody didn't try to at least put up some sort of barrier, you know,
Right.
a little ahead of time to get people not to go in there. That's interesting.
Right. Now, just to be clear, we do not have any 1863
Right.
photos of the Copse. We have a photo from Little Round Tub where you can zoom in and see them at a distance, but this is one of the best ones. We have some of these late 1870s photos, and you can see the umbrella-shaped copse of trees kind of over there. You can see a lot more trees as well in the angle. This is, in other words, looking from near the Emmitsburg Road up toward where we stand now. It really gives you an idea. And just to be clear, these are not the trees that were there at the time, but they're probably the descendants of those trees.
Yes, we don't think any of those are original. And we also should say, Gary, a shout out to your mentor, William Frasnito. Pick up early photography at Gettysburg and look at the views in there from 1877, which are basically the earliest views of the copse of trees. And he's got a whole explanation of that, which we've summarized here a little bit. But if you want to look at photos, of course, that's a great place to go on some of these.
Yeah, and one thing is, we're going to cover this maybe a little bit later, but I do want to say that Wayne mentioned that there would be, I think, 1893, a high watermark monument put up. Did I get that date right, Wayne?
I think it's in the, now you got me going.
Well, now let me say mid-1890s,
Yeah.
Before Batchelder dies in 1894-ish. But here are some, of course, veterans there at what we call the high watermark monument, or as Kris talks about sometimes, the open book that you have right there, but you can see the fence and the clump of trees there. But that also meant that everybody else wanted their picture taken here, so there was a photographer set up in the 1890s where back then you didn't take a camera with you, you went to the camera. And here's typical of the type of group that would gather at the high watermark monument, and with easily the two coolest tourists I've ever seen around, what is this, about 1900, 1910 maybe? Check these dudes out. I think this dude later became the singer of the Simple Minds in the 1980s, as a matter of fact. Check this out. And of course, all these people, probably knew or had the opportunity to know Civil War veterans. They are our connection in a way to the clump of trees.
I love
the
the
angle.
sunglasses. It looks like the early Ray-Ban.
Those dudes are cool, I would say. And we have just
Yeah.
hundreds of these because the photographers were stationed here. And
This was kind of like Devil's Den, wasn't it, Gary?
yes,
later on.
Exactly.
I mean,
in fact,
yeah.
everybody wanted to be at a few places. Here in Devil's Den were the most popular, and Little Round Top. So eventually the park had enough of it, and they started licensing photographers to rotate. Okay, I'm just going to say it in a New York accent for no reason. You're at Little Round Top. You go to East Cemetery Hill. You're going to be at the angle. I don't know why I said it that way.
So
but I always pictured
they
it that way.
rotated.
They would rotate through, so you can see Tipton and M.F. Williams and Mumper and their photographs at different spots based on where they were stationed that particular day, week, or month.
Yeah. Wow.
So let's walk a little bit closer, Wayne.
Sure.
I think we're about to meet a friend of ours who might be able to provide something special. But before we meet with him, do you have anything to add? I mean, walking around on this lovely day, you already pointed out that some of the rocks you see, not only were they here at the battle, they show up in the early photos.
Yeah, I just think one of the things that I'd like to mention to the viewers is they've done a lot more recently on the mental aspects of Pickett's charge. And I think one of the things we don't think about are these troops killed, they're maimed here, the psychological experience of going through Pickett's charge, whether you're a Union defender, whether you're a Confederate attacker, this is going to leave an indelible mark on these men for the rest of their lives, regardless of what their physical condition is coming out of here. And I would encourage those that are here listening to look into some of these personal accounts. Henry Owen has one here from the 18th Virginia. He had a reoccurring dream about being here in Pickett's charge. Another one, Eppa Hutton of the 8th Virginia, is here, and he says that he can't even come back to walk this ground because he would see where his friends are all killed here during the time of the battle. So I think one of the things that we need to think about when we experience this walking at Gettysburg, on every place on the battlefield, is to understand that the experiences held here by the Union and Confederate forces fighting here, and by the civilians that are living here for that matter, those are traumatic experiences, and PTSD exists during the time of the Civil War. So just don't think about the physical aspects of this. Would be some of my thoughts on it, Gary.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and I think the veterans struggled to try to explain these things. And when Batchelder himself was meeting with veterans, he would talk to them and collect their reminiscences and their correspondence, and a lot of them tried to get at this terrible thing that they had just experienced, and many of them couldn't even put words to it or refused to. It was too painful.
Right, and so for some of these men, it's therapeutic. to come back and walk on the battlefield and talk to the veterans that were here that experienced the same things that they did. And for others, it was not so. They didn't want to have anything to do with that afterwards. So there's a full gambit of what that actually looks like. But for those of us that study the Battle of Gettysburg, I think it's easy for us to compartmentalize this off. This battle happened 3 days. Here's what happened to everybody, and everybody got up and left. If you are a survivor here, you're going to be living with Pickett's charge for the rest of your life. Doesn't matter when and where that is. And that's something I think that we all should just reflect on when we're here.
Good, good. Well, I can't put it any better. Wayne, let's go over here and meet our guest over here, and I think we got something special coming up.
All right, I'm looking forward to it.
And everybody, I think this is about to get a little bit cooler, because let me introduce Kris Gwinn. You've seen him before, Chief of Interpretation here at the Gettysburg National Military Park. Kris, I understand you've got something maybe special as an understatement planned for us?
We got something unique, I think, for the American Battlefield Trust, for our viewers online, as we commemorate the 160th anniversary of the battle. Garry, we still get about 1 million people who come to this battlefield park every year, and very, very few in the history of this place get to do what we're going to do. So we're going to go inside the famous copse of trees on Cemetery Ridge on the Gettysburg battlefield. Garry, have you been in here before?
Yeah, I can say I can remember 30 years ago thinking that I would pass from this earth without ever standing where we're about to stand. Well, you know, and I say that both with excitement and with some reverence, for I know what happened there and here and the next place. So it's unthinkable.
It's a special place, and you know, like a lot of the locations on the battlefield, Meade's headquarters, the Bryan Farm, we only let people in there every now and then. And that's especially true for the copse of trees here. So it's a special place. It's probably the most famous clump of trees in American history. And it's somewhere that visitors really don't get to go, which I think is why it's so exciting today to be out with you and your viewers to talk a little bit about what happened here 160 years ago.
All right, well, let's do this. And it looks like it's pretty thick in there, but let's see what we can see, Kris.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're about to head into the clump, or the copse of trees, here at Gettysburg.
And I just want to reiterate that the American Battlefield Trust has worked with the park for this experience. They've gone through the permitting process. This is not something you can come out and do on your own. This is something special we're doing with the American Battlefield Trust today. So if you're climbing over the fence, you're gonna get a law enforcement contact. So just be aware of that. But this is what makes it special for us today. So let's head in, Garry.
All right, you go first, sir.
All right, I'm gonna open up the gate here.
That's Kris White behind the camera there. Come on in. It's rocky.
It's rocky, it's thick. One thing I do think it's important to note is a lot of times we get visitors asking us, are these the original trees? And they're not. These are second, third generation trees of what might have been here at the time of the battle. So these are not what we call witness trees.
Yeah, and I think we're talking about oaks. Is that right? I'm not strong on
yeah.
trees, but you know, oaks like this sort of, they can grow in soil that's not that deep, that's rocky. Let me, if you don't mind, let me bring in Wayne Motts here. You've already heard from him, and he's our good friend and the third person I ever met in Gettysburg. And Wayne has written, of course, along with Jim Hessler, a book about Pickett's Charge, and it's my favorite book about Pickett's Charge. And what you did around here about the look of the angle and the clump of trees is some of my favorite stuff. So A, what's it like to be in here? And B, let's get into a little bit about what happened in here.
Well, thanks a lot, Garry, and thanks to Kris and Kris. It's just an honor to be in here. And you asked me once, hey, Wayne, have you ever been in here before? And I can't remember, so if it was, I'm like a little kid that was at Gettysburg at 9, and now I'm back here in my 50s. So the copse of trees is, as everyone knows, really, Garry, that prominent, what they call the aiming point for Pickett's Charge. And there's a lot of lore around it and behind it related to John Batchelder, who happened to be the government historian here at Gettysburg. So in 1868, Walter Harrison, who's Pickett's adjutant general, his chief staff officer, came to Gettysburg on a reunion tour, and there were hardly any Confederates in that reunion group. And then he ended up writing and publishing a work in 1870 called Pickett's Men of Fragment War History. And Walter Harrison is the one that tells John Batchelder this place here was the point of direction, or an aiming point, for Pickett's Charge on July 3rd, 1863. It's just a small clump of oak trees at the time of the Battle of Gettysburg. Hardly any trees along this ridge. So Batchelder takes this idea and really runs with it. And then he begins to formulate a history around the copse of trees where you're at today as an aiming point or point of direction, not only for Pickett's charge on July 3rd, but also for the cannonade during the time of the battle.
Well, let's get into that. When we leave the trees too, let's talk about how he not only made this a big deal, but memorialized it as well. But Wayne or Kris, here we are finally in here, and the clump of trees was not just an aiming point. There's fighting going on the fringes of it, in it. We've already talked about some of the units positioned around it. Wayne or Kris, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Chris, you want to jump in, or you want me to jump in?
Pick it up.
Okay.
I'll chime in where necessary.
So right behind where I'm standing, of course, the 69th Pennsylvania of the Philadelphia Brigade is broken. That line is broken, and where we're standing, where Kris is, right at the camera, the 19th Massachusetts reinforcements from the Union 2nd Army Corps that are fighting up here, and there's some right behind this line, are rushed in right here to where we're standing. And the 19th Mass came right into this copse of trees, went right past where Kris is standing, out the other side, and try to seal off this hole. And they're led by a major named Edmund Rice. Rice was the man chiefly in front of this group. He was shot in the leg inside right here in the copse of trees. And this regiment gets 5 medals of honor. And one of the most dramatic is right on the edge of this tree line where Joseph DeCastro, carrying the white state colors of the 19th Mass, runs into the color bearer of the 14th Virginia, knocks him down, takes the flag out of his hand, and for that act, Joseph DeCastro gets the Medal of Honor, one of 5 medals of honor given to the 19th Mass for their participation here on July 3rd. Major Rice, Edmund Rice, gets one as well, but DeCastro is the first man of Hispanic descent to receive the Medal of Honor in the history of the United States. And it was right here, right inside where we're standing.
And that's just unbelievable. Doesn't he, sort of get the flag and then just hand it over to his colonel or commander and then go back into battle? That just
there's
blows
some confusion
me away.
as to who actually gets the, which gets this. Kris, you want to weigh in on something?
One of my favorite stories about the Copse involves Winfield Scott Hancock. So any student of the battle knows on July 3rd, actually the whole Battle of Gettysburg, Hancock's just everywhere, moving reinforcements to key locations. At the height of the attack, as Confederates are pouring over the wall, as the 69th Pennsylvania is trying to cling to the rock wall, Hancock goes up to the 2 regiments Wayne was just talking about, the 42nd New York and the 19th Massachusetts, Arthur Devereux, James Mallon, and they ask, Hancock if they should move ahead, and Hancock says, yeah, I better get in there pretty damn quick. And of course they do, and it's one of the things that kind of drive back that Confederate incursion. One of my favorite collection of letters from the American Civil War is from a guy named Henry Abbott, and he's in the 20th Massachusetts, so the Harvard Regiment. And your viewers, folks who've been to the battlefield, you probably know their monument. It's that giant rock on a pedestal of Pudding Stone, which is the state rock of Massachusetts, Gary. I don't know if you knew that. I'm a Massachusetts man myself, so I need to highlight that. But Abbott writes about the counterattack of the 20th Massachusetts moving just to the west of kind of where we are right now. And Abbott survives the battle. He dies at the Wilderness the next year. But he would write a note to his father about this moment, describing that initial euphoria of victory that happens here on the ridge at Gettysburg around the copse of trees. And then the realization of the human cost of that, because he loses his good friend to actually friendly fire during the bombardment. So there's just so many stories that take place within this very small area. But another thing that we were talking about a little bit earlier is kind of the memory of the battle. Wayne, you were talking about John Batchelder. For a lot of the veterans that survived the battle that fought here, they wanted to have their monuments as close to the copse of trees as they could. So if you were to visit in the early 1900s, you might see the monument to the 19th Massachusetts literally right behind the camera. Of course, they were moved later on by Hancock Avenue, but an incredibly significant area for the men that fought here, for the veterans that came back to the battlefield.
Yeah, and Kris, some of the viewers may not know the battlefield changes. So there was a roadway that came right down near here, right behind the Union defense, right up next to the copse of trees where these Massachusetts memorials are. And then, of course, there also was a roadway inside where the angle is today called Webb Avenue. And it hadn't been there for about 30 years. But
I drove on that once.
Yeah, and I remember the first year I guided, Gary. That was in, and you took a tour. You went right through there. So there's been some preservation changes here over the years.
Absolutely. If you come to the battlefield and it's been really dry, you can see where that avenue used to cut through the land. So you can still kind of see the shadow of it on Cemetery Ridge today.
Not only that, but Harrow Avenue, which is right behind the camera there, we'll flash up a picture of that. You know, you can see brigade plaques apparently facing the wrong way. That's because they were put in to face the avenue, and now the avenue's over there that is most close by. So you have to study the battlefield to understand these things, not just the battle.
And Gary, I think too, also for the viewers, for all of us here, what's really interesting about what you're shooting is you can see it pretty clearly. At the time of the battle, this was full of smoke. Nobody could see anything. Union and Confederate uniforms are mixed in here. Bodies are lying on the ground. People are passing on top of people. So what happened inside this copse of trees, just horrific. You can't really put it into words what this must have looked like on July 3rd for the troops that are fighting here inside.
Yeah, and one of the things I think we already talked about it that you mentioned in your book is that this area was not the nicely groomed area we see now with the nice, grass and, tended to walls and everything. This was a nasty, scrubby area. The clump was not a perfect circle. It was, sort of scrubs of trees around, and plus then the 69th Pennsylvania had cleared some of the, sort of brush away from the wall and threw it behind them. So there's like a slashing behind them. There's all sorts of growth and little bushes around here and whatnot. And coming in the copse of trees right now is sort of like that. We've left the well-manicured area that is a military park, and we've come in to see something a little bit closer to the battle itself. And I didn't expect this. There's rocks everywhere. I can see some, the hilly terrain. There's almost a knoll behind you over there, Kris, which I find very interesting.
You're going uphill, Gary. So when you're down here on the south side of the Copse, where Kris is filming right now, and then you're moving through this, you can't really see what's out on the other side here, especially when you've got all the smoke. You add that factor in here. It's a lot to the difference, I think, during the time of the fighting.
Yeah, I hope you guys don't mind if I put in, this one's a little bit longer. Maybe we'll throw in some B-roll of us walking around here after we shoot, but it just has to be one of the best descriptions ever here. And I'd read it years ago, but it was when I heard Doug Dowd say it with such passion, and he's so good at that, our good friend who's on here often, gives the impression of somebody who was here. And he says, foot to foot, body to body, and man to man, they struggled, pushed, strived, and killed. Each had rather die than yield. The mass of wounded and heaps of dead entangled the feet of the contestants, and underneath the trampling mass, wounded men who could no longer stand struggled, fought, shouted, and killed, hatless, coatless, drowned in sweat, black with powder, red with blood, stifling in the horrid heat, parched with smoke and blind with dust. With fiendish yells and strange oaths, they blindly plied the work of slaughter. Maybe rewind and listen to that again and close your eyes and picture that description. And people have tried to describe battle before. I'm glad that none of us here have ever seen anything like this, but this one seems to come close to what a horrific moment this must have been.
Yeah. It's a great quote, Gary, and it's tough for us today to imagine that happening here, because the park is beautiful. Even here amongst the trees in the copse on Cemetery Ridge, it's a beautiful place, but underneath that is that layer that you just highlighted there.
Yeah, good. Let me go and grab the camera from Kris White, because here we are inside the clump of trees, and I'm going to wager he has something to add, and it'll probably be something good. So let me switch with him real quick.
We're setting the bar high for me to have something good.
Yeah, this better be great, Kris.
So I love that Wayne brought up Edmund Rice. He's a Norwich attendee. I'm a graduate of Norwich, and Norwich sends the second most officers to the armies, just behind West Point. It's the oldest military school behind West Point here in the United States. So I'm always love to talk about Norwich, and the history of Norwich during the Civil War is By the Blood of Our Alumni is the name of that book, and I think it's appropriate. And on the cover of that is the copse of trees here at Gettysburg. I love seeing the 19th and 20th Massachusetts. They have signs out here that'll tell you exactly what is happening. They're very succinct. Some of them come right from the official records, and they tell us how they came into line. They were facing in one direction. They went by the right flank, and they went into a column of fours and started to march off in that direction towards Meade's headquarters. Then they went by the left flank, which put them right into a battle line, and they charged straight into here. But I think the allure of the copse of trees, as Wayne alluded to, comes from John Badger Batchelder, the official historian of the battle. He creates a monument right here that most people have seen. It's an open book, the open book of history here at the high water mark. And he helps to, give us that name, the high water mark. And I think about in the 1950s and 1960s when Dwight Eisenhower was living here. Eisenhower, there's a picture of him standing there looking at that book with Bruce Catton, looking into the copse of trees. And he's about to film a special for, I think, CBS on Abraham Lincoln, one of his favorite people, and who even give the address here on June 30th of 1963, and then on November 19th of 1963, he'll give addresses here at Gettysburg talking about the ties here in history. And one of his favorite spots to come was right here, go to the Virginia Memorial, and then come to the other side here at Gettysburg. But probably one of the biggest allures that brings the military here in the 1920s is the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps is fighting for its life because John Pershing, General of the Armies, wants to get rid of the Marine Corps after World War I. So Smedley Butler, a two-time Medal of Honor recipient, decides to go on a PR campaign, and he goes to places like Antietam, the Wilderness, and here at Gettysburg, and he brings along part of the Marine Corps, and he puts on a massive reenactment out here in the fields of Pickett's charge. In fact, he brings Marines across here carrying flags that say Garnett and Armistead on them, and they're carrying 1903 Springfields and 1911 Colts. Nothing is historically accurate about this, but it's an awesome sight to see. They have smoke screens down. They have 30 caliber machine guns along the Emmitsburg Road. They have planes flying overhead and barrage balloons as well. But they're using the high water mark here at Gettysburg for this grand dramatic reenactment, and they bring up President Harding, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a guy named Teddy Roosevelt Jr., who's a Medal of Honor recipient, the Governor of Virginia, the Governor of Pennsylvania, as well as John Lejeune and John Pershing, and all the press that they can bring out here to show off this battlefield and to use it for a PR purpose, to keep the Marine Corps together. And just to add to it, we go to the 106th Pennsylvania Monument, we sit a Civil War veteran by an active duty Marine, and we show the young and the old coming together here at that high water mark and showing the value of not only this historical place that was under the purview of the War Department at the time. Now we show just how important that impact of Pickett's charge is on the American psyche. We bring both North and South together here, we bring them together, and we still have our Marine Corps today because of some of these Marine exercises here at Gettysburg, the Wilderness, and Antietam. It's a spectacle to see, but I think it's also important to remember that this place changes over time. I'll just finish up by saying this was also the place where Dwight Eisenhower cut his teeth as a young commander in 1918 at Camp Colt. In 1917, there was the Camp of the United States Soldiers right here around the copse of trees. It's a huge, huge place. One of my ancestors actually trained here in 1917, went off to the war with the 3rd Infantry Division and earned the Rock of the Marne nom de guerre over in July of 1922 when he was wounded on the Western Front. They put in a swimming pool just down from us. They have a motor pool behind us. They use this area as a training ground. So over the years, it's changed. It's always changed in appearance somewhat, where we would have visitors out here. We'd have monuments. We'd have the military. We'd have the Marines out here. But over time, the story kept bringing people back to the place. And I think that that's the most important part of this. Batchelder grabbed onto that story. If you believe parts of it or not, that he put in writing. And some of the veterans fought with him, including Winfield Scott Hancock, about what actually happened here. But this place was just an important symbol for Americans. And as Kris pointed out, 1 million people a year still come here to visit places that drew in Butler, Harding, Eisenhower, de Gaulle, Winston Churchill, and many others.
I am going to call an audible here and just keep walking, and I'm going to have a moment of zen before we leave here. I'm just going to walk around here and show you more of the clump of trees before we leave.